The desert wind sweeps across the Sahel, carrying dust, heat, and silence. Yet beneath that silence, something extraordinary has happened. In a move that shocked the world, the government of Burkina Faso under President Ibrahim Traoré buried over 200 tons of watermelons deep into the sands. Yes, watermelons. Not sold, not eaten, but buried. To many, it seemed madness. A hungry nation throwing food away? Critics laughed, headlines mocked. Commentators from London to New York asked, why would a starving country bury its crops? But the truth is, this story was never about food. It was about soil, about survival, about sovereignty. This project, known as Project Oasis, was not a mistake. It was deliberate, strategic, and, according to Burkinabe officials, absolutely necessary. For decades, the people of Burkina Faso have been told that salvation lies in shipments, bags of fertilizer with foreign logos, contracts tied to aid, rules written in distant capitals. But what happens when a country dares to say no? What happens when people refuse to wait? In this video, we uncover the story of Project Oasis. We'll see how spoiled melons turned into weapons against dependency, how science collided with politics, how hope spread from dusty fields to crowded cities, and how powerful institutions, feeling threatened, moved quickly to crush it. So we ask you, could a pile of rotting fruit mark the beginning of Africa's break from agricultural dependency? Or is this just another fragile dream waiting to wither? Think of your own family. Would you accept outsiders deciding how your land should grow? It began quietly, with no press conference, no parade, just trucks, loaded not with weapons or aid, but with cracked, overripe watermelons. In villages across Burkina Faso, agricultural teams dug deep pits into the sun-scorched crust of the Sahel. One by one, the spoiled fruits disappeared beneath the sand. Officials explained the logic. Watermelons are more than fruit. They are reservoirs. Over 90% water, rich in potassium, calcium, magnesium, and organic carbon. Buried underground, they decompose into slow-release sponges. They moisten the soil. They attract microbial life. They restore texture to land long stripped by drought and erosion. Independent agronomists observed early trials. The results startled them. In test plots where melons were buried, soil moisture lasted up to 14 days after rainfall, compared to just 4 in control plots. Millet seedlings germinated almost twice as fast. By the third week, roots penetrated deeper, clinging to life in ground once considered dead. The numbers began to spread. Respiration tests revealed microbial activity rising by more than 35%. Soil organic matter ticked upward. Germination rates for staple crops improved by 40%. To farmers, these weren't abstract statistics. They were survival. A farmer named Adama, in the northern province, stood before reporters and pointed at his field. For 10 years, he said, he threw seed into dust. Nothing answered. Then came Project Oasis. Now he showed rows of green millet shoots piercing through the sand. His words were simple. I don't care what they call it. I see green. My children will eat. But Project Oasis was never just about biology. It was political. In a national address, President Ibrahim Traoré declared, "If the world will not sell us fertilizers without chains, we will create fertility with what our land already gives us." His words struck deep. For decades, Burkina Faso relied on expensive imports, fertilizers shipped from Europe, financed by aid, bound by strict conditions. Every disruption, whether political tension, trade delays, or donor demands, meant failed harvests and rising hunger. Traoré's message was clear. Fertility would no longer arrive in foreign bags. It would grow from within, from waste turned into wealth, from fruit once discarded, now transformed into freedom. Officials began planning expansions. Mango skins, citrus peels, peanut shells, millet husks. Waste streams from local markets could all be repurposed. Yet not everyone was convinced. Critics inside Burkina Faso called the method risky, too experimental. They warned of pests, methane emissions, uneven nutrient release. Others mocked the idea of burying fruit as a substitute for industrial inputs. Government scientists countered with data. They published side-by-side photos, barren, cracked soil on one side, a green patch sprouting millet on the other. This, they said, was not theory. This was evidence. The Ministry of Finance released a preliminary report. Even partial adoption of organic burial methods could reduce fertilizer imports by 15% over 5 years, saving tens of millions of dollars annually. Money that could be redirected to electrification, healthcare, rural schools. In marketplaces, people began whispering. Was this madness or genius? Was their government improvising, or had it uncovered something real? Farmers near test sites no longer doubted. They saw proof with their own eyes. Women's cooperatives volunteered to collect spoiled fruit. Youth groups helped dig burial pits. Schools turned melon burial into science lessons, calling it planting water. What had started as a government initiative was evolving into a grassroots movement. But revolutions, even quiet ones, never go unnoticed. The turning point did not come from the fields. It came from a leak. 6 weeks after the first melons disappeared beneath the desert, an internal memo from a European Agricultural Trade Association appeared online. Its tone was urgent. Its warning was clear. If Burkina Faso's melon burial project proved effective, it could destabilize fertilizer markets across West Africa. Billions of dollars in annual revenue would be at risk. Contracts, supply chains, influence, all threatened by what seemed like a strange experiment in a forgotten corner of the Sahel. But the memo revealed something deeper. It did not call for scientific rebuttal, it called for narrative control. Within days, Western headlines shifted. Where once there had been cartoons mocking the idea of burying food, now came sharper accusations. Major outlets labeled Project Oasis a reckless stunt. Commentators described it as a dangerous distraction from real reform. One American op-ed went further, warning that the initiative could mask corruption or even foreign interference. Inside Burkina Faso, the memo hit like a storm. Radio stations read its lines aloud. Talk shows erupted in debate. In marketplaces and mosques, people asked, if this project truly threatened no one, why are powerful institutions so desperate to stop it? Opposition leaders seized the moment. They demanded investigations into costs, risks, environmental impacts. Protesters in Ouagadougou carried signs, "Where is our food?" and "Where is the truth?" Skepticism surged, especially in cities where images of trucks dumping melons into pits seemed distant and absurd. Yet in rural communities, the mood was different. Farmers who had watched millet sprout from barren soil stood by the project. A retired soldier named Solen, once posted on the northern border, now joined a local monitoring team. Speaking on community radio, he said, "We used to guard borders. Now we guard the soil. One protects territory, the other protects the future." His words echoed across provinces. Support grew. Women's groups organized melon collection drives. Students mapped burial sites and tracked soil moisture. Agricultural extension workers trained volunteers in safe burial practices. What began as a state program was quietly becoming a people's movement. Still, international pressure mounted. Fertilizer lobbyists launched media campaigns. Think tanks warned of biosecurity risks. Donor agencies delayed unrelated agricultural funds, citing concerns about experimental policy directions. The Burkina Faso government struck back. In a nationally televised address, the Minister of Agriculture stood before 2 photographs. On the left, cracked, lifeless soil. On the right, a green patch of millet rising from a melon burial plot. "This is not theater," she said. "This is evidence. And evidence does not require permission." Regional universities published preliminary data. Independent scientists confirmed increased microbial activity, improved seedling survival, and higher organic matter. Skeptics began to soften. Across West Africa, curiosity spread. In Mali, radio callers asked whether surplus baobab pulp could be used the same way. In Chad, local leaders invited Burkinabe agronomists to share techniques. In Senegal, an agricultural college launched a competition for low-cost organic amendments. Project Oasis was no longer just Burkina Faso's story. It was a regional conversation. But with each sign of momentum came new resistance. Editorial boards abroad warned that the experiment risked giving false hope to desperate farmers. Analysts in Brussels framed it as a symbol of antagonism toward foreign partnerships. In Washington, intelligence briefings quietly referred to Burkina Faso's soil strategy as a geopolitical realignment. It wasn't just about melons anymore. It was about narrative, about power, about whether Africa could choose its own path without permission. As the controversy raged, something quieter unfolded far from the cameras. In villages and towns across Burkina Faso, Project Oasis was beginning to reshape daily life. In the marketplace of Kaya, women's cooperatives launched what they called melon days. Vendors collected overripe fruit from stalls, loaded them into carts, and delivered them to designated burial sites. With technical guidance, they mixed melon pulp with crop residues and charcoal dust, creating richer compost. The compost was sold in small batches to neighboring villages, with profits reinvested in schools and community wells. Waste was no longer waste. It had become a microeconomy. In classrooms near Bobo Dioulasso, teachers turned melon burial into lessons. Each child carried one fruit into a demonstration field. They called it planting water. Years later, educators said the children might forget the science, but they would not forget the act, the idea that even something fragile could restore what was thought lost. Farmers reported real gains. Households involved in Project Oasis saved up to 20% on farming inputs in a single season. For wealthy countries, such savings meant little. But for poor families, it was transformative. One mother in Kupela used her savings to buy school uniforms and a solar lantern. Holding her child's new backpack, she told the journalist, "The melon gave us this." The project also sparked a cultural shift. Graffiti appeared on city walls, green fists breaking chains, vines sprouting from buried fruit. Folk musicians released songs praising the water beneath the dust. At rallies unrelated to agriculture, protesters chanted slogans about planting freedom. The language of farming was becoming the language of sovereignty. Politically, the impact was undeniable. Opposition parties initially dismissed Project Oasis as symbolic populism, but as local support grew, their tone softened. Civil society organizations still demanded transparency and environmental monitoring, yet they acknowledged the project's power to unite communities. For Traoré's government, this momentum was invaluable. Project Oasis had become more than policy. It was legitimacy, a technical experiment transformed into a national ethos. By positioning the project as both practical and symbolic, the administration redefined political credibility, not through promises written abroad, but through action rooted in local soil. Internationally, donor institutions faced a dilemma. Some agencies withheld funds, signaling disapproval. Others quietly opened channels to study low-cost soil restoration. A European NGO specializing in agroecology even offered collaboration on the condition that findings remain open source. Still, skepticism lingered. Editorial boards in Western capitals warned of false hope. Think tanks called the method unscalable. But such critiques rang hollow against lived reality. What mattered most was not the number of hectares treated, it was the perception. For the first time in decades, farmers believed salvation could come from within. That belief, officials argued, was itself revolutionary. A retired diplomat once said, "For years, Africa has been told it needs help, but when Africans help themselves, in ways we did not script, the narrative breaks." And breaking the narrative was precisely what made powerful institutions uneasy. Still, revolutions are never without cost. Rising enthusiasm came with rising tension. Aid requirements tightened. Diplomatic warmth cooled. The unspoken threat lingered. Defiance carries consequences. The people of Burkina Faso now faced a deeper question. Could they defend not just their soil, but their choice to stand apart? Outside Africa, Project Oasis became a mirror, reflecting fear in some capitals and admiration in others. In Washington, officials at USAID and the State Department avoided public statements. Yet sources close to regional desks confirmed that the project had been discussed in closed-door meetings. The concern was not melons, it was momentum. If Burkina Faso's model spread to fragile states questioning the utility of aid, the architecture of agricultural assistance itself could be undermined. As one analyst whispered, "It's not the method, it's the message. We don't need you." In Brussels, the discomfort ran deeper. European trade lobbies, already rattled by the leaked memo, pressed policymakers to treat Project Oasis as a threat. Reports framed it as non-standard practice, one that could destabilize regional markets and foster antagonism toward partnerships with Europe. A diplomat admitted bluntly, "If Africa feeds itself with its waste, what exactly are we selling?" Contrast that with the East. Russian media praised the project as a triumph of post-colonial innovation. Commentators drew parallels to Soviet-era resourcefulness, painting Traoré as a symbol of defiance. Chinese journals dissected the method in technical detail, with officials in Beijing hinting at trials in Central Asia. Turkish outlets described Project Oasis as a marriage of science and ancestral wisdom. In Africa, neighbors took notice. Mali's radio programs debated fruit-based soil recovery. Niger's agricultural colleges launched student design contests for composting systems. In Chad, community leaders invited Burkinabe agronomists to share techniques. Across the Sahel, the idea spread faster than any memo could suppress. But as praise grew, so did pressure. In donor circles, intelligence briefings began labeling Burkina Faso's pivot as a symbolic geopolitical realignment. Aid agencies quietly recalibrated their strategies. Editorial boards abroad warned that experiments like this could fracture cooperation. Project Oasis, once a quirky headline about buried fruit, had become a fault line in global politics. To some, it was chaos. To others, dignity. For the West, the question was no longer whether the melons would sprout, but whether the idea behind them would. As the growing season advanced, the story of Project Oasis ceased to be merely about agriculture. It became a question of dignity, of sovereignty, of who decides the future of Africa's soil. The buried melons will eventually rot away. Their water will seep into the ground, their nutrients will feed the earth. But the idea they carried, the belief that survival can be homegrown, will not decompose. Ideas, once unearthed, are harder to silence than crops. Yet revolutions, even quiet ones, never pass without storms. Already, aid conditions are tightening. Diplomatic warmth is fading. Donor agencies speak in whispers about policy realignment. The unspoken warning is clear. Defiance has a cost. For families in Burkina Faso, the question is not abstract. It is practical. Can their children eat? Can their soil live? Can their land sustain itself without waiting for permission from abroad? In a dusty village in the north, a farmer named Adama answers with action. He points to the green shoots rising from land once barren. "We buried fruit," he says. "The soil woke up. My children will eat." For him, that is proof enough. But for the wider world, unease lingers. If a simple melon can disrupt billion-dollar markets, ignite solidarity, and inspire movements from Mali to Chad, what happens when more nations decide to bury waste and grow independence? So we leave you with this thought. Is President Ibrahim Traoré's strategy a genuine path to sovereignty, or is it a fragile gesture dressed in hope? Can Africa really feed itself without the chains of global dependency? Or is this only the first battle in a much longer war? If you believe in dignity, in justice, in a people defending their soil with faith and courage, share this story. If you see in these buried melons more than fruit, if you see freedom, then join us. Because history is not being written in Washington or Brussels, but in the fields of Ouagadougou, in the hands of farmers, in the hearts of children who call it planting water. And perhaps the most radical act a people can take is the simplest: to stop waiting.